Hey everyone, Cynics here, and this is going to be a video about rendering African skin tones. So it's been a couple years since I did the painting faces videos, but right after I finished them, I made a note to myself that I would try to learn how to render skin tones of different ethnicities. And it took me a while to kind of figure it out, but I'm ready to tackle it now, so hopefully this will be an informative video. I always struggled with this in the past, showing different races with their skin tones. And I think the problem is you need to get out of the mindset of doing the same thing you do for, say, a white skin tone and just making it darker, because that will not look good. And once you kind of establish that you're going to have to learn something new, you can really focus on what the differences are. So you can see I made a couple quick little notes about contrast control and being subtle, and those were just observations I had made from looking at pictures and things, and you'll see how those come into play. But I made this quick little kind of box of typical white European skin tones. Now I'm just gonna make one with some African skin tones over here. And you can see that at first, I'm just going to show you what would happen if I kind of approached it the exact same way as I did the European one. And you could see this strong contrast, which is matching the contrast of the European one. But when I do it at these low values, suddenly it feels very extreme and it doesn't look right. So you're going to need to get away from those old habits. If your brain was on autopilot when it came to picking skin tones, like mine sometimes is, you just kind of have this idea of where your base value is going to be, where your highlight value is going to be, like kind of on that little triangle in Painter, and you don't really spend a lot of time thinking about, actually switching things up and making it more subtle. So you can see here my African skin tone. I tried to bring in a lot of brightness. I have the same lighting scheme, and these really aren't faces, but I kind of gave them a couple little rounded qualities. But you can see that I gave it a nice highlight on the forehead that's actually reflecting the surroundings. So I'm just pretending these people are both out and about in a blue sunny day. So you can see it has a really high strength highlight there. Um, and that's like the farthest thing from the dark tones. It also is the chance for me to get in a lot of color, because when I'm doing things this subtle, I can't just, go in and throw in a big, strong pink color here and there, because that'll look weird. It won't look right. But I can bring in a lot of interesting hue variation by bringing in the surroundings. So when things are tend to be of a darker value, when you bring in these tones, you'll see a lot more of the reflected color. And even though that color looked very blue, it's actually just pretty close to gray. But because of the way that values are and because of the way our brain works, it looks extra blue, but it's really just kind of in the gray family. And you can see here I switched off the colors, or I'm sorry, I switched off the saturation just so you can see these differences. So the white European one, it has very subtle highlights but very strong contrast on the shadows on the sides. But meanwhile, on the African skin tone, it has very strong highlights but very subtle shadows. And I think that's the key part, is those subtle contrasts on the shadows to show the form. And one other thing to note, which I kind of glossed over, was these skin tones tend to be more red. So definitely away from those oranges and yellows and farther down into the red range and closer to the purple range. And that's just how the skin tone seems to work. So anyway, I'm just going to make some faces from my own imagination. And you can see I'm starting with the shape of the head because that's just normally how I like to start my face drawings. And then just filling in some of the minor surrounding stuff, such as ears and maybe a neck. You can see I've made the ears pretty small, and the neck is kind of, I don't know, average. But you can probably tell already that this is going to be a male character just from the strength of the jaw and the size of the neck and everything. But you can see I usually start with the nose once I have everything established and then work my other facial features based on that. So you can see here, I'm just going to go over some kind of possible racial traits that you might notice. Some European countries, the nose tends to be very kind of thin and pointy. It's very kind of sticks out a lot. And in a lot of African racial traits, it tends to be a bit rounder, a bit flatter. And I guess the other main thing to note would be that the lips tend to be a bit fuller in African racial traits, but with white people, they can be very thin. So you can see me kind of demonstrating this over here to the right, where the lips, when they're real thin, they kind of just come up from a little line in the middle, and they don't really expand to the full width of the mouth like they would in other people. It is also very important to know that these are just examples of some common racial traits, but not everyone looks the same, especially not everyone from a certain area looks a certain way. These are just, helpful guidelines that might help you out, but everyone's different, so you can feel free to vary things to whatever degree you want. So anyway, I think that's hopefully that didn't, I don't know. It's weird to talk about differences in races without feeling like you're, I don't know, being inappropriate in some way, but I actually find these things very interesting. I love that everyone looks a little different and, you can kind of tell where people are from because of the little differences in their faces. And it makes it a lot more fun to draw because if everyone looked the exact same, it'd be very boring. And if you draw enough faces, you find yourself just striving to find people that are more interesting to look at. You don't want to draw faces that are real boring. You want to draw things that have a little more character and interesting traits. So this is going to be my male character over here. I thought he turned out pretty good. And I actually drew a couple more beforehand just to get warmed up. And I thought I would include those in the video too. So I have these two female characters. And I thought they were kind of interesting. It's fun to kind of play with the shape of the hair because it can be a lot different than what you would see in, a white person, just because you can have a lot more texture and volume and do way more interesting things, which is a lot of fun and it can be really cool. Anyway, I'm just jumping right in on this first face. I'm actually gonna make it really dark. And the reasoning for that is just that I thought, okay, I'll go to, like an extreme, and that way I can learn a lot. And then if I need to make something lighter, you can always just, dial back on what you've learned. And that seems like a helpful way for me to learn how to do things. So you can see here I'm going with a really kind of strong dark skin tone, a lot of red in there, and I made sure to include my color kind of wheel on the screen just so you guys can see the colors I'm picking and where they are in terms of saturation and value and everything. But anyway, I'm spending a ton of time just trying to be as subtle as can be with all these shadows, and I brought in as much blue and strong highlight reflections on the forehead, just kind of mimicking that quick mock-up I did. And I've seen, some pictures that capture that kind of strong blue reflected light on the forehead, and I always thought that looked so cool, and I thought that would be fun. And anyway, you can see just lots of subtlety in my hue variation and values going on. I'm just nitpicking. If you look at the color wheel, you can see the colors between everything is just barely changing. They're all in that same little range. Maybe the hue is changing, but when the circle there is just kind of hanging out in the bottom and not really doing much. I tried to bring in some kind of, I don't know, slight bluish tones to the hair just to make it kind of meld with everything else a little better. Wasn't sure if I needed to lighten things up a bit because I was getting worried that the video wouldn't show off the differences because sometimes contrasts don't show up as well on video, but it seems to be okay. So basic things, a lot of little bounce light here and there. I brought it in on the side of the head, around the forehead. But I didn't bring in too much color around the cheeks and lips. I thought I'd keep it really natural and just have a nice kind of pretty simple look to it. So I like this character. I think she's pretty. A lot of times I'm turning the color layer off and on and looking at the sketch as I do in a lot of different drawings, and it's it's kind of important to me to have that sketch on a separate layer just so I can make sure I don't lose so much energy. Because anytime you're, focused on rendering something, it takes away all that kinetic energy that you get in your line work, and your painting can look very lifeless, very stale, and it just won't have that same kick to it that art can have. So once again, just checking nonstop, trying to figure out where I might have lost some of the energy. I can see the hair is a little different, and I feel like the eyes don't quite have the same interest to them. But nonetheless, I like that character. I put a little band in the hair just to make it look like it's going back a bit and then getting kind of nice and puffy in the back. But next, I'm just working on this male character. And for this one, I just wanted to scale things back a lot and make him, I don't know, a lot lighter, but yet still kind of capture the same techniques. So it's kind of like in between the way I would typically paint my boring white European faces and the one I just did. So I'm bringing in a little blue, but I'm not having the strong reflected light like coming down straight from the top. I wanted to have some secondary lighting on the side and maybe have him feel like this is more of an indoor lighting scheme. So a lot of warm tones across the front of the face and just the little bounce light on the sides. It's probably worth noting that I had to try this one a couple times. I painted it like, I would say 2 times before this with varying degrees of success. I tried a couple different lighting schemes. But I feel like this one came out way better. It looks way more realistic. And, I was going around. And that it probably looks just more realistic just because I had a couple cracks at it to kind of figure out what was working and what wasn't. But you can see here, I'm using the same techniques that you use in all faces, which is to have desaturated tones on the bottom half where you might have, the mustache area, the beard area. You can get more grayer tones, and that makes it look like, a slight stubbly effect. And then in the middle of the face, say around the eyes and the cheeks, you can get those warmer tones, those stronger saturations. And then in the forehead, you lose some of those saturations. You can have some more yellowish tones, but definitely the middle of the face is where you get the strongest saturations. And then everything else just kind of tapers off in different ways from there. But I thought this turned out pretty good. It seems to look pretty, I don't know. I feel like it came across looking pretty realistic for whatever reason. And I guess, let's see, what other things did I forget to mention? You can see around the lips, I tried to give a nice highlight along the top lip, and I did that in both of them. You can see in the female character. And that's something I don't think I was doing before in any of my painting faces stuff. But I noticed it, different pictures, and I was like, oh, I need to start adding that. And I feel like it adds a nice little pop of lights just around that area that just makes it more interesting and more believable. But anyway, this last painting, I just kind of rushed through. I'll be honest, I'm not spending a lot of time talking about it. It's just a profile view, and I didn't really know what to do. So it's very basic. It's just a low contrast rendering without much fanfare. There's not even really any bounce light from the environment, and it's just kind of a simple test of being subtle, I guess you can say. So it's just all around super subtle, but I had fun making the hair. I wanted it to have this nice like round ball. Maybe there's probably one on each side, like a nice poofy round ball. Maybe it's tied with a little bit of ribbon, so I got that pink ribbon going on. But overall, I think that's about it for what I wanted to say. Hopefully, I didn't forget too much stuff, and the video will probably speak for itself in terms of methods. But yeah, the key thing was slightly redder tones, to have low contrast shadows, high contrast highlights. I think those are the three key factors that will help you a lot when you're trying to render African skin tones. And I think that's about it. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you got something good out of this. And I really kind of enjoyed this. I'm definitely going to be painting more different people from different areas in the future and hopefully learning a lot more. So, thanks for watching. And once again, I will have a little QR code on the end for people with 3DSs to view some kind of fun 3D image regarding this video.